Next, I'll click on the New Project link, and this window pops up with oodles of options for various project types. With Visual C++ selected on the left, you can see the options available for creating new project files for C and C++ projects. I suggest you always start with Win32 project. These project templates are pretty antiquated, but this one gives you some useful options, as you'll see in a moment. Next, give the project a name. This will be the name of the project and also the name of the executable that the project will create and will represent your program. You can always change this at a later stage as well. Finally, you just need to decide where you'd like to store your project files. Now, we don't need to create a directory for a solution. This is a useful option if you plan to have multiple components, such as DLLs, that make up your application. But we won't do that for now. Okay. Next, Visual Studio pops up a wizard with some final options. Click the Next button, and you can see some common application types. For now, let's pick a console application and an empty project as a starting point. And that's it. Visual Studio has a variety of docked windows, but only one really matters: the Solution Explorer. You can safely hide all of the rest. You can always find them if you need anything from Visual Studio's View menu. And you can drag the Solution Explorer window to whichever side feels most natural for you. I like it on the left. Right at the top of the Solution Explorer, you can see the words Solution Sample. That's the solution, and a solution is just a collection of projects. We only have one project, and it's called Sample. Under the project, there are these folders. They're not really folders, but filters. The first, External Dependencies, is automatically populated with all of the libraries and sources that your project refers to. Nothing at this point. The next three are used to group source files, but they're optional and you can safely delete them. Right, now it's time to add a source file to the project. The source file is where we can actually write some C or C++ source code that will be compiled to produce our application. I can right-click on the project, select Add, and New Item. There isn't an option for a C source file, but you can just select a C++ file at the top and name the file sample.c. The .c extension is traditionally used to denote C source code. But keep in mind that the extension doesn't hold much weight. Visual Studio will assume that it's a C source file and compile it as such, but you can always override that. We can now write a minimal C program. Now, before we compile, we should always crank up the warning level. That's the degree or level of warning information that the compiler will throw at you when it evaluates your code. The more disparaging remarks about your code, the better. So right-click on the project again and select Properties. Now select C, C++ on the left. And on the right, you'll see the warning level option. Annoyingly, before changing the warning level, you need to head up and select all configurations. This ensures that the changes apply to both debug and release builds of your application. Okay, now you can change the warning level to warning level 4. And close the window. Now we can compile the code we wrote a moment ago. You can do so by pressing Ctrl-Shift-B on the keyboard simultaneously. At the bottom, you'll notice the output window. If something were wrong with the code, either warnings or errors, you'd see them described here. Notice also that it gives you the name of the executable. I can open a command prompt and run that executable to run the program. And nothing happens. But that's because the program doesn't do much of anything since its main function is empty. We'll start writing some interesting C programs in a moment, but for now let's print out a simple and historical salute. The C programming language is quite simple, really. Printf is not even part of the language, but instead part of a library. As you'll come to see in this course, C programmers, and C++ programmers for that matter, rely heavily on libraries to get stuff done. We just need to tell the compiler where the printf function is declared. And that's it. I'll again build the project by pressing Ctrl-Shift-B. And then we can try it out on the command prompt. Success. Wonderful. So if you're following along, which I sure hope you are, you've just written your first C program inside Visual Studio. Now let's switch gears and see how the same thing can be achieved using the command prompt. While Visual Studio is nice, it does hide a lot of details and adds its own complexity. To really understand what's going on, we need to visit the command prompt, and that's up next. The Visual C++ compiler is called CL. Here you can see some confusing numbers. Don't worry too much about it. In the title bar you can see 2013, which is the marketing name for the Visual Studio family, for the Visual Studio release. Then in the path itself you can see 12.0, which is the actual version number of Visual Studio. Visual Studio 2013 is actually Visual Studio version 12. And then in the output from the CL command, you can see the actual compiler version is 18. Anyway, now that we've confirmed that the compiler is in the path, let's hop on over to the temp location and give it a try. The first thing we need is a simple C program to compile. And I'll just use Notepad to get this done. I tend to use Notepad 2, a slightly better version of the classical text editor, but you can use whatever editor you wish. Here I'll begin by including the standard I/O library, as I did in the previous segment, so that I can use the handy printf function. And then I can write the program's main function. I'll just hide these line numbers for convenience. There we go. The operating system will indirectly call the main function, and main can simply call the printf function. And that's it. I'll save and close. Now I can compile this program from the command prompt using CL. If you get tired of all the Microsoft product information, you can use the No Logo option to get rid of it all. Now it simply prints out the name of each source file as it's compiled. Since we didn't tell the compiler what to call the resulting executable, it simply defaulted to sample, the name of the source file. But this can get quite unpredictable, so you can be explicit and give it a name. FE represents the file name, that's the F, and for the executable, that's the E. So there's the corresponding options for naming the debugging output, object file, and much more. At least when compared with some of its counterparts, the Visual C++ compiler's command line options are actually quite approachable and understandable. There are one or two more options I would point out at this stage. The first is to crank up the warning level to ensure nothing goes unnoticed. And the last one, for now, specifies the source file type. Now, the compiler naturally assumes that the sample.c file is a C source file, and that's fine. But sometimes you might have a source file with a different extension, or you might actually want to tell the compiler to compile it as if it were a C++ source file. The latter is actually a great idea, since this will ensure that you're using a safe subset of C that is fully compatible with C++. The compiler tends to also be more pedantic when confronted with C++ source code, and that's a good thing. So to override the default and insist that the compiler treat the code as C++, you can use the TP option. Finally, let's run our sample program, called soup. There we go. Our first C program compiled with the command line. And that's all there is to getting started with Visual C++. As you've seen, Visual C++ is available for free in the Express editions of Visual Studio. There are also various offers for students and entrepreneurs that may qualify for the professional editions of Visual Studio. Yes, you need to install Visual Studio with all its extras, but once it's installed, it's quite simple to get started. Remember to set the warning level up to level 4 for any new projects you create, since that will pick up mistakes early on and avoid unnecessary headaches later on. Finally, it's quite simple to build programs from the command prompt. I just touched on a few options to get you started. No logo avoids product information. FE sets the file name for the resulting executable. W4 sets the warning level, and TP tells the compiler to treat all C source files as C++ for improved diagnostics and compatibility.